All right, so we just defined productive efficiency where goods are produced by the lowest cost producers. Allocative efficiency where production matches consumer preferences. Alternatively said, you're not producing things that at a cost higher than the willingness to pay. And then we define externalities, which are, when someone not related to a transaction benefits or loses from that transaction. Benefits in the case of positive externalities, loses in the case of negative externalities. So let's move on to one more example of efficiency that you've seen. Okay, so what is this? This is the joint PPF for Kendrick and Marshall, which I'm sure you remember from lecture 2. I think it was lecture 2. Okay, so in the trade lecture, we said anything below this PPF was inefficient, anything under the line. Okay. Specifically, what I meant is that it's Pareto inefficient. What do I mean that it's Pareto inefficient? Okay, that means I can make Kendrick better off if I produce songs. I can make Marshall better off if I produce more songs. Okay, so if I'm at like this point here, I am producing less cars and less songs than I can. Okay, and regardless of if I give them all the additional, let's say, make more songs, and I go to this point here, regardless of whether I give them all to Kendrick or give them all to Marshall, doesn't matter. As long as someone gets the additional songs made, then I'm moving to a more Pareto efficient outcome. So everything along the line I said was efficient and feasible. Okay, feasible means it's able to be done. Anything below the line is inefficient. And by inefficient, now we have a more clear definition. I can benefit Marshall or Kendrick or both without hurting the other by producing more. Okay, that's what it means to be Pareto efficient. Okay, so anything below here is Pareto inefficient. Okay, you could produce more and make either Marshall, Kendrick, or both better off without taking from the other person. Okay. Another tie off here is I talked in the last slide about being productively inefficient. Where I talked about productive efficiency. If you give the wrong comparative advantage, what happens is you have a graph that's going to look like this. Boom and boom. It's going to be curved the other way around. Okay? What does that mean? It means you've assigned the wrong comparative advantage. The opportunity cost is higher here, so the person who starts with the good shouldn't be doing that good. So the person who starts making songs has a higher comparative advantage, a higher opportunity cost for songs in this case. Okay, so they're going to be under the PPF, so to be Pareto inefficient, and it's Pareto inefficient because it's productively inefficient because you're assigning the person with higher opportunity cost to do the thing that they have not comparative advantage in. Okay, so you've produced in the wrong pattern. You've produced in a productively inefficient way. You've given the higher cost producer the good that they have a higher cost in, okay, versus the lower cost producer, which would be productively efficient. Okay, so that is a case of both. It's a case of Pareto inefficiency because you're productively inefficient. Okay, so they're related terms. You can be Pareto inefficient and productively inefficient. You can be Pareto inefficient and allocatively inefficient, or some combination thereof. Okay. So lastly, I had mentioned this bullet point that markets promote efficiencies, but they might have negative externalities. Okay. They might also underproduce positive externalities. And we'll talk a little bit about that now. All right, so here's the demand curve we had from lecture 3, or I think lecture 4.1, about supply and demand, where I had Joe, Jack, and John, and they each had some willingness to pay for hot dogs, and we ranked them, and we came up with this demand curve. And then we had Dietz and Watson and Franks and Hebrew National, and they each had some marginal cost, and we ranked them and created this supply curve. Okay. So we have these. We now have a demand curve. We have a supply curve. Okay. The market economy is both Pareto efficient, allocatively efficient, and productively efficient. What do I mean by that? Okay. So up here is the highest willingness to pay hot dogs. Okay, so this might be, let's say Joe wanted to pay the most for a hot dog. This would be Joe's first hot dog, where he's willing to pay $13 for it or something like that. Okay, down here is the hot dogs with the lowest willingness to pay. So this might be Joe's sixth hot dog, where he doesn't want a hot dog at all, right? He's not willing to pay zero. He's willing to pay $0 for the hot dog. He would basically only take it if you gave it to him for free. Okay, so as you lower and lower the price, the more and more hot dogs are going to be eaten, but the willingness to pay is going to be dropped down, and that's why more and more hot dogs are going to be eaten. Okay, so conversely, as you increase the price, only the highest willingness to pay hot dogs will be eaten. Okay, so here, this point here in the center is your equilibrium. Okay, so everything to the left are the hot dogs that get bought. So the demand curve from here to here gives you your willingness to pay for hot dogs that get bought. Okay, every hot dog that's bought is bought by someone with a higher willingness to pay than the hot dogs that aren't bought. Okay, so these hot dogs are all associated with a higher willingness to pay than these hot dogs. And it's only these hot dogs that get bought. Okay. Now, on the producer side of things, if you were to rank from lowest marginal cost to highest marginal cost for producing a hot dog, you'd have the lowest marginal cost down here, highest marginal cost up here. So essentially, these are the highest cost to produce hot dogs, and these are the lowest cost to produce hot dogs. Okay. The marginal cost for the hot dogs that get sold down here, so these are the hot dogs that get sold, everything to the left of the equilibrium point, they're all lower than the marginal cost for the hot dogs that don't get sold up here. Okay. So goods are produced by the lowest cost firms. So they're coming from the highest willingness to pay people, they're coming from the lowest cost firms and they're going to the highest willingness to pay people. Okay, so allocatively efficient, only the highest willingness to pay people are getting it, and nobody with a lower willingness to pay than the cost is getting it. And they're produced by the lowest cost firms. Only the lowest cost firms are producing it. Okay, every hot dog that is bought has a higher associated willingness to pay than the seller's cost. So if we took the willingness to pay minus the cost, everything on this side is higher than everything on this side. Okay, lowest cost firms are lower than the willingness to pay for the people who buy the hot dog. Okay, so every consumer who purchases values the hot dogs more than every seller who makes a sale. So these sellers are willing to sell the hot dog at a price that is lower than the consumer is willing to pay for the hot dog. Okay. Over here, we have every hot dog that's not being sold. And those are not being sold at a lower willingness to pay than the seller's cost. Okay. So these are the costs associated with the seller. These are the willingness to pay. So for this consumer, he has a lower willingness to pay than the seller who would sell it to him. Okay. So in that sense, it's allocatively efficient. Okay. So productively efficient, goods are produced by the lowest cost firm. Allocatively efficient, one more. These both go into allocatively efficient. Okay, you're only consuming goods that provide general value, goods that have a higher willingness to pay than the cost associated with them, or a lower cost than the willingness to pay associated with them. Different ways of saying the same thing. Okay. So lowest cost firms, productively efficient. Allocatively efficient means that the higher willingness to pay people get the hot dog, lower willingness to pay people do not get the hot dog, and they don't get it because they're the cost to produce the hot dog is higher than their willingness to pay. And I talked about this last week, but if you were to change around the situation, if you were to give one of these people, one of these guys, a hot dog, and you were to take it from someone with, a low cost hot dog provider, what ends up happening? Okay, basically you're bumping someone over here out of the market. Okay, and you're decreasing the total consumer surplus by doing so. If you were to take this guy's willingness to pay minus the price he pays for the hot dog, it would be lower than the difference of, let's say, this guy minus the price paid for a hot dog. Okay, even if we were to lower the price below equilibrium for this guy. Okay, there's a higher individual consumer surplus for this guy over here. That is an ugly. That is not even a circle. I don't know what just happened there. But this guy has a higher willingness to pay than this guy. We'll call him A. We'll call this guy B. Okay. If we were to give the hot dog to B, even if we took it from a low-cost producer and we dropped the price down to exactly the producer's cost, he'd have a lower consumer surplus than A. And when you take away consumer surplus from A to give it to B, you're decreasing the total consumer surplus, and you're basically not making consumers better or producers better. You're taking away from A, giving it to B at a lower rate. You're being Pareto inefficient. Okay. If you were to try to come up with an allocation that increases the consumer and producer surplus, increases the total surplus, you'd have to do so by taking away from one person to give to another. Okay, so that's what I mean by the market economy is Pareto efficient. Okay, so changing who gets the good and who produces the good will only decrease the total surplus. All right, now, all that being said, you might ask the question, all right, so that's all cool. So we've just established that markets are the most efficient thing on earth. Why would we ever want to deviate from markets? Why not just have markets all the time? And that'll be the next slide and the last slide. So buckle up, buckaroos.